You know, among all the talk of some limited international agreements on Ukraine yesterday came one piece of really disturbing news. Anti-Semitic flyers distributed in eastern Ukraine ordering Jews on one city to register with local officials or face deportation. It's not clear who wrote or distributed the flyers, and there's a lot of debate as to some of the political motivations, whether or not the papers may have been propaganda pushed to legitimize Russian expansion in Ukraine. But the world did react, including Secretary of State John Kerry.
This is not just intolerable, it's grotesque. It is beyond unacceptable.
But I got to tell you, it's only one of the recent headlines on a subject many people thought was a form of hatred long consigned to the past, or at least just in the far, far fringes of the outliers there. It turns out anti-Semitism far from dead, and that includes much closer to home. Isn't that right, Andrew?
Yeah, Rich, and all this as we continue with the holiday of Passover, one of the most significant holidays in the Jewish calendar. Here in the U.S., we saw anti-Semitism, or hatred and prejudice against Jews, at its most violent just last weekend. In a Kansas City suburb, a gunman with ties to the KKK opened fire at a Jewish community center and assisted living facility. 3 people, ironically, none of them who were Jewish, were killed. The gunman hollered Heil Hitler as he was being led away by police. He's been charged with murder and may face hate crime prosecution as well. Sadly, the story does not end there. The mayor of the town where that gunman lives, a man named Dan Clevenger, actually spoke in support of the gunman and his beliefs, none of which he thinks makes him remotely anti-Semitic, showing just how deep Jewish hatred often lies and how so many people don't seem to recognize it in themselves or in others. After last weekend's shootings, Mayor Clevenger said this when asked about the gunman, quote, "Kind of agreed with him on some things, but I don't like to express that too much." A look back, though, shows the mayor more than agrees with the gunman's views. In a 2004 letter to a local paper, Clevenger wrote, "I'm a friend of Fraser Miller," last weekend's JCC shooter, adding the Jew-run medical industry has succeeded in destroying the United States workforce, and views that were reinforced by a TV interview that the mayor gave just this week.
Just because some people like running those corporations that are destroying us, that doesn't mean that the rest of the race or religion or whatever is bad. I don't stereotype.
Here in our region, home to the largest assembly of Jews in the United States, not so immune to acts of anti-Semitism either. These images are from schools in Pine Bush, New York, and Orange County. Swastikas on local desks, lockers, textbooks, even on a student's face. The state is now investigating, and similar vandalism and threats make headlines on occasion across our region. All of those incidents are among the types of anti-Semitic acts tracked every year by the Anti-Defamation League. That's a civil rights group founded to fight anti-Semitism. They unfortunately cannot track Jewish hatred in the heart and mind, only these specific types of acts. They report nearly 1,700 acts of anti-Semitism in the U.S. in the past 2 years, happening in 40 states plus the District of Columbia. And in our region, we saw more than 300 acts last year alone, with more in New York than in any other state in America. The ADL also reporting notable and in some cases multiple incidents of anti-Semitism in 19 countries in Europe in the past 3 years, including Germany, France, the UK, Greece, Sweden, as well as in Russia and in Ukraine. Rich?
In fact, we did a special along with Richard Brodsky about the rise of neo-Nazism in parts of Eastern Europe. That said, Andrew, we've talked about this before. You've worked in different markets before you came back home. You've been in the Montanas and the West Texases of the world, of the country, and you said people don't realize here, if they think it's just the suburbs in and around New York City, there's a whole other part of the country, and it's sometimes a little scary what you hear, little, and see.
You know, there are pockets of anti-Semitism in those, but as there are anywhere, as there are in our area as well. It tends to be the further away you get from Jewish communities, established Jewish communities like we have more of in our region, the more general ignorance there is about Judaism. And so you wind up, I had somebody ask me if I had horns. I had somebody ask me if I had a tail. I mean, that's not anti-Semitic in and of itself, that's just ignorant. And that's the kind of environment that I think helps breed hatred and anti-Semitism like in so many other avenues. The less you're exposed to experiences, the less you're exposed to people of different backgrounds, the less likely you are to understand them, and the more likely you are to carry grudges or carry resentments or fallacies that you just don't know any about.
I'm curious. Is there a part that says the more you give attention to these idiots, the more you give them a platform, or is it that it's dangerous that we minimize these people just as fringe because it's more out there and more prevalent than the public thinks? What do you believe?
Well, I think, as a Jew, and particularly hearing about what happened in Kansas City and then Ukraine, we have to speak out. I mean, notwithstanding that giving attention is a problem, but we have no choice but to speak out, and we have to do it in a thoughtful way. I mean, ignorance exists, it will always exist. It's never excusable for an elected official to speak like that man spoke in my book. I don't about any kind of blatant hostility and discrimination, and for a public official, that's just unacceptable. I think he should resign just for his comments.
There is a move to impeach him.
I know,
in that
and
time.
I think that's fairly ignorant people in the general population. Yes, but even there's an obligation to speak out, and there's an obligation as people of multiple faiths, and America's been good about this, having a united front about what's tolerable and what's acceptable and what's not. And I think on this, we have to publicly make it known.
It's also historically, you see these things tend to bubble to the surface more, particularly in bad economic times or other times of political distress. And certainly since 2008, we've had something of a world recession or not great economic times. And Europe has not had a very good time of it. Those pockets where neo-Nazism was flourishing, as Richard Brodsky helped us identify, places like Greece and places like in the Baltic states where the economy has been particularly bad. You can add Ukraine and Russia to that matrix as well. The economy hasn't been great. Now you have the political upheaval. Jewish people tend to be an immediate first target when it comes to blame or scapegoating.
It's not just Eastern Europe. We see even in elements in France and other places
lots of it in France.
Right, where it's down at. Dominic, just from a journalistic call, today there was another swastika's school in New Jersey and stuff. It's that line of how much do you give attention, but at the same end, if you ignore it, at what peril?
I feel in this particular situation, we have to put a full spotlight on what's going on. And it's disgusting what the mayor of that town did. He should be forced to resign. His ignorance can't be tolerated. It's disgusting. And if the mayor is saying things like that, what do you expect for the people to do?
I mean, he did that in an article 10 years ago. He's a sitting elected official. To me, that was the scariest part of the story.
But the soundbite was from this week.
Right,
the soundbite from this week after the shooting.
You managed and oversaw a county with very diverse faiths and concentrations and everything, probably as unique as almost any in the country. Did you see this situation? Have you seen it over the years get worse, or has it always been the same?
Well, I think you always have the pockets, as everyone has suggested, and where you fear anyone who's different than you are. And I think you always work to try to fix that. In Rockland, as in Orange County now, you've got issues that are inflaming those differences and pitting neighbor against neighbor for reasons that have to do with different societal approaches. But I think one of the most upsetting of this is you're dealing with a new totalitarian government with Putin. And he has seen, and I believe he's expanding Russia, and in that totalitarianism is a complete lack of respect for anybody that's different, just like Hitler, okay, that you're not this person, you better follow the line. And I almost got the sense that this Russian antagonism, this assertiveness, this aggressiveness, this illegal attacking of a country is related to the sense that we Russians, are better than all of you other people, including the Jews who live in Ukraine. And that is a very frightening, as part of the overall issue, I think it's a very frightening development.
But Richard, I spoke to Congressman Engel's office today, who's
he's
the
going
ranker.
out on an envoy, isn't he?
He's on the way there now. And, there has been denial, whether it's fair or not, from the Russian community that this person is legitimately theirs. And I think we need to find out whether this is sort of a Russian thing or it's just some individual person or some group. And from what I heard from them, at this point, they're not persuaded. They don't have enough evidence to decide.
Well, the only problem with that, Shelley, is everyone who's wearing a mask happens to be related to pro-Russia.
I know.
The masks, the issue of not identifying themselves, and the lies that are occurring over there. And so one has to take a leap, but not a very large one, I think.
I understand. I feel the same. I do think, though, we owe it to have them do some investigation as to whether it's legitimate, because as a provocative measure, it's very effective. And
I hear what you're saying, and I think we have to wait to see this borne out. It does fit a pattern, though,
and
of
no
every
question.
provocative thing to do the very action and accuse the Ukrainians of being the ones responsible for it. So, as you said, Congressman Engel and others are going out on an envoy there, and we're going to see. Hopefully, we'll get some answers to that. All right, and please, at home, get involved as well. Head to Facebook and Twitter and sound off on a question tonight. Do you think anti-Semitism is more prevalent than many think? Coming up next, everyone, there was the school snow mess, then there's the chronic tardiness, then you've got the questionable phone call to the precinct house. Is Mayor Bill de Blasio now not only fessing up to some bad PR, but will he turn around after the first 100 days? We're going to tell you what he says he needs to work on when we come back.